and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to The Point on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Bev Turner.
So it is a bit of a bleak show, but stay with us because time is running out in the search for the missing Titan submersible as it reaches a critical moment. The air supply on board is estimated to run out this morning. We will bring you any updates as we get them.
And a recession now seems inevitable. The Bank of England is going to hike interest rates for the 13th consecutive time today at midday. Stay tuned for that.
And the British Defence Secretary has ruled himself out of contention for the position of NATO Secretary-General. This comes as the current leader, Mr Stoltenberg, is due to step down in September. That's a picture of Ben Wallace in a tank.
And in truth, he hasn't ruled himself out. Joe Biden doesn't want him. So
Quite.
He doesn't want a British Secretary-General of NATO, so he's putting a brave face on it. And Rishi Sunak will be relieved because it would otherwise be another by-election, which they'd lose.
A bit more to that story, maybe, than the way we sold it to you there. But anyway, let us know your thoughts this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address. First of all, though, here is your news with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Bev. Good morning. It's 9:32. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The US Coast Guard says the search of the area where signals thought to sound out SOS are being detected has been expanded. That as they race to locate the missing tourist submersible visiting the Titanic shipwreck runs out. Aircraft and 10 ships are searching 10,000 square miles of the North Atlantic, while 2 remote-controlled submersibles use sonar to monitor under the surface. Latalant, carrying state-of-the-art ROV, has arrived in the area, according to website marinetraffic.com. Meanwhile, British deepwater salvage company Magellan is en route to aid in the rescue. 5 people are inside the craft that lost contact on Sunday as it made a descent to the Titanic wreck. The Bank of England is set to increase the interest rate for a 13th consecutive time later as it tries to tackle ongoing price rises. The latest figures published yesterday showed inflation was stuck at 8.7% in May. The interest rate, currently at 4.5%, remains the bank's primary tool to lower inflation. Amid rising inflation, Labour's called on banks to provide support to homeowners facing mortgage payment difficulties. The party claims their 5-point plan would allow borrowers to switch to interest-only payments or extend their mortgage terms. The government says lenders are already required to engage with struggling customers. And King Charles says the Windrush generation has made a significant difference to the UK, praising its legacy as profound and permanent. 75 years after the first crossing from the Caribbean, the King will be among those at a service held at Windsor Castle later, marking the anniversary. A £1 million fundraising effort's also underway to recover the anchor from the ship that made the crossing and put it on public display. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now, though, it's back to Andrew and Beth.
Very good morning. Thank you for joining us. Time is, of course, running out to find and rescue the 5 men trapped on board the Titan submersible as hopes begin to fade over their chances of survival.
Well, you know, it disappeared on Sunday after the contact was broken after an hour and 45 minutes. The submersible's 96 hours of emergency oxygen could run out as early as midday.
So those on board include, just to remind you, billionaire Hamish Harding, OceanGate CEO Stockton Rush, French Navy veteran P.H. Nargeolet and Pakistani businessman Shahzada Dawood and his son Suleiman, who is just 19.
Well, joining us for an update is our national reporter, Paul Hawkins. Well, good morning, Paul. I mean, there was a flurry of excitement here on GB News yesterday when we got that great story that they'd worked out that the banging sounds that they detected by sonar were SOS alerts, but still they haven't found the submersible.
No, and what the key to knowing, I mean, it is good when you pick up those SOS alerts. If you pick it up from one sonar buoy, you can narrow the area down to, 1 to 2 kilometres, the search area. Multiple buoys, you can get it down to 100 metres. So it depends how many sensors picked up those signals in terms of the search area. But what we do know is that we've been tracking a lot of hopes are being pinned on the Atelant, the L'Atelant, I should say, the French scientific research vessel. That's en route. By the way, these images we're seeing, this is the search area. It's a slightly incomprehensible graphic that was tweeted by the US Coast Guard this morning. The red X at the top of the picture, that's where the site of the Titanic wreckage is. And then we think what they've done is they've laid out a grid system. And one would have thought that the grid system reflects the way the currents are flowing and where they think, theoretically, the Titan could be resting on the seabed. So that's the graph. We're still trying to piece together exactly what that means, but we think that's what it means for now. That's what the US Coast Guard have tweeted this morning. And then, as I say, on the website marinetraffic.com, I don't know if we can bring that up now as well. We've been watching the progress of the L'Atelant, and it's arriving at the site as we speak. It's just homing in on the wreckage of the Titanic, and that's carrying this Victor 6000 state-of-the-art ROV, a remote-operated vehicle that can reach the bottom of the seabed. It's got robotic arms, state-of-the-art cameras. There's a picture of it there as it's being lowered into the water. It actually takes 25 people to operate that. Not there. It is obviously it's unmanned when it's beneath the water, but it takes 25 people on the surface to operate the arms, the cameras, the sensors. So they're hoping that once they get that into the water, they can hopefully try and find out where it is. It can't raise it by itself to the surface, but what it can do is use the robotic arms to either to free, this is all hypothetical, of course, but to free Titan from the wreckage and then to attach a hook, essentially, or some sort of device with a cable and then winch it back to the surface, if indeed that is what is needed.
And that winching process alone to the surface, I've read this morning, Paul, it could take 3 hours.
Yeah, it could do, yeah. Yeah, depending on the conditions at sea, which at the moment are pretty decent. Yeah. But, I mean, we're talking about hours that are left now, really. Yeah. I mean, strictly speaking, the cut-off point is around 1, 2 this afternoon in terms of the levels of oxygen. It's a window in reality. Yeah. And obviously it depends on how good the men inside have been staying calm. Because
they've got Mr. Titanic in there, haven't they?
They've got Mr. Titanic in there. They've got Hamish Harding as well, experienced explorer. Yeah. So they've got people in there who will have known straight away once they're in trouble, right, this is what we need to do. And if they've done it well, they can eke out that window and make that oxygen stretch out to this late afternoon, early evening. Certainly the people who are in charge of the search and rescue, they're not going to give up at 2 o'clock and say, right, that's it.
Is the banging still going on?
We haven't heard any update. All we know is yesterday there was banging, the day before there was banging. We haven't had an update today. The update that normally comes through from the US Coast Guard around 6 o'clock UK time, that will be crucial. Yeah. If we don't hear anything before that later this evening.
Of course, one of the things that it's been a steep learning curve for all of us, hasn't it, really, about what goes on under the ocean, is that actually the side of the Titanic can be quite noisy anyway, because there are parts that are still attached to the ship that knock around, and bits of metal and floating debris.
And it's in 2 sections. They're about 600 metres apart, and then each one is surrounded by debris. And of course, the currents. In fact, on that website that we've been tracking, you can see the RMS Titanic in one area, and then you actually see the wreckage in another area.
Yeah.
Because, of course, when it sank, as anything does that sinks, the currents then carry it.
Yeah.
So it's quite a wide area.
It broke in two, didn't it?
And broken into, surrounded by debris. And also with it makes sonar particularly difficult as well, because sonar is effectively hitting the bottom, hitting the seabed, and then it comes back up. You're looking for irregularities in the surface, right? Oh, that looks like something unusual. But if it's sitting on a wreckage site that is already irregular, then it makes it even harder to pick up where the Titan would be.
Yeah.
You know what is very sad to look at is OceanGate, the company, and OceanGate Expeditions both have quite busy Twitter feeds where they were posting photos and comments about the build-up to this trip and lots of lovely smiley photographs of everybody together and the work that had gone into it.
Yeah.
And it is incredibly poignant now as you're looking at this of how stark the contrast is to how the families must feel now.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And there's questions, I mean, there's always going to be questions, but questions about why it took them so long to alert the American Coast Guard.
Yeah, and one would have thought that will be one of the key lines of inquiry once this is resolved, hopefully in a good way. Either way, whatever happens, that will be one line of inquiry. Did the company take all the adequate precautions it could have? Did it do everything it could? We always add the caveat that I know a lot has been talked about, the video controller, about the fact that a lot of this was kind of bolted together from various... the CEO talked about getting parts from Camper World. And on the face of it, there is some very basic stuff there. But we know behind the scenes, though, this was very innovative, cutting-edge technology because there are very few vehicles in the world that can reach this depth.
Right.
And that is why it's unregulated. That's why there's no industry standard. There's no one that comes along and inspects it and says, yeah, that meets all the safety standards, so we're going to pass it. Because like in the early days of the invention of the car, no one came along and said to Henry Ford, oh, you've got some bits wrong there, we can't pass that. Because, you know, it's
interesting. Talking to various companies involved in this sort of activity, now the word regulation keeps coming up. I suspect it's going to become a regulated area.
Yeah, one would have thought so. So we'll see how it pans out. But for now, I think those are questions for later down the line. At the moment, it's all about getting there as quickly. And it's literally hour by hour, this story.
And as the family keeps saying, keep praying.
Yeah, absolutely. What else can they do at this
Paul
stage?
Hawkins, our national reporter. Paul will be back with us, and we'll keep you updated on the race to try to find the Titan submersible.
You know, some of the graphics as well of the site, and your newspaper, the Mail, has been remarkable on this story. They're brilliant when you need these explainers. And some of the graphics demonstrating how deep the Titanic is on the bottom of the ocean are so chilling that you just cannot countenance how any family member thought it was a good idea.
Yeah. What, to allow a 19-year-old?
To allow your loved ones to go out there, your children, or your husband. You know, what's your plan B? What's the escape route? What is the worst-case scenario? And when you look at some of these social media feeds, it's almost like everybody and I've been there, because my ex-husband used to be one of these adventurers. Everybody gets so wrapped up in the enthusiasm and the optimism and the excitement, and it almost like there needs to be somebody in the room to go, hang on a minute, you thought about the worst case.
But imagine walking 2.5 miles. That's how deep Titan's gone into the ocean.
Unbelievable.
Freezing cold, pitch black.
Yeah, terrifying. Right.
We're going to get interest rates rising today. We're not going to pretend that it could be or maybe, because they are going to go up today, which probably means a recession is inevitable. They could go up by as much as 0.5%. We'll know at noon.
That's right. It would be, of course, the Bank of England's 13th consecutive rise. It comes as inflation remains at a high of 8.7%. Our very own business and economics editor, Liam Halligan, is with us in the studio. This is the news that none of us wanted.
It's the news that's going to dominate British politics until the next general election.
So
it is the economy stupid, as Bill Clinton's campaign chief said back in 1992. Economies make or break political parties. They win or lose elections, particularly at turning points in economies at times like this. Those inflation numbers yesterday were a shock. The headline rate of inflation stayed at 8.7%. That's compared to 4% in the US and just over 6% in the Eurozone. Britain is now an outlier.
And Liam,
that, of course, is
2.1% in Greece of all countries. Normally the basket case of Europe, 2.1% in Greece, and we're 8.7%.
And indeed, the Greek government's currently paying less to borrow than the British government. That's where we are.
How have we made such a mess of it?
The UK government's debt went above 100% of GDP in May. We also learnt yesterday another huge story that was barely remarked upon because of the inflation numbers. Food inflation, that's a big reason why price pressures are staying high. And also what we call core inflation, that actually went up. That strips out volatile items like food and energy and imported items. It's all about domestic price pressures. I think a lot of that is coming from those years and years and years when the Bank of England was creating huge amounts of money. There were very few of us in the media who were complaining about that. Those chickens are now coming home to roost. That's a big reason we've got this inflation.
Because we have to be posh, don't we, when we talk about the city and call it quantitative easing.
Quantitative.
Quantitative
yeah,
easing.
because if you don't put the you're not allowed to... You're obviously thick, so you're not allowed to talk about it.
But what we really mean is printing money.
Well, it's not printing physical money, it's creating digital money. Yeah. And before the pandemic, for about 10 years... we did create lots and lots of money. It was an emergency measure after the 2008 financial crisis, but the economic medicine became like a lifestyle choice, economic crack cocaine. It pushed up stocks and bonds. It meant governments could borrow cheaply because it rigged bond markets. But of course, it meant those of us that didn't have assets, we got hammered as asset prices everywhere else went up. But this quantitative easing we've had since COVID, that's gone straight into the bank accounts of firms and households through furlough scheme, business recovery loan. It paid for all those lockdown measures, creating money from nothing. And that extra demand is now pushing into an economy that's struggling to supply things with ongoing post-COVID logistical issues, and that is a big reason for the inflation.
It was so obvious, though, Liam, wasn't it?
Well, some of us have been writing it for years, Bev, and we were called stupid.
But it was just so obvious. When we started just dishing out like money during the pandemic.
Well, crack open a history book. You know, the Bank of England governor's got a PhD in economic history.
What use is that? Don't you want to know about money?
If you crack open a history book, you might remember that the Roman Empire collapsed because it massively increased the money supply. Weimar Germany collapsed because it massively increased the money supply. If this stuff works, Zimbabwe would be in the G7. You cannot become more prosperous by creating lots and lots and lots of extra money, which is what we've done in the Western world over the past 10 years, and almost nobody has remarked upon it. Well, some of us did, and we were bang on the money.
Right. Andrew Bailey, is he the worst governor of the Bank of England in modern history?
Well, I've got to be careful here because I don't think no one has been earlier and more forthright in criticising Andrew Bailey than me. I'm the guy who was writing in the Telegraph in March 2021. We've got to start raising interest rates now when inflation was less than 1%. Yeah. I was saying we've got to start raising interest rates now to get our increases in early to convince the markets that we're serious because there's a big inflation coming. But if you now panic and you do massive interest rate rises and get rid of the governor of the Bank of England, the market is just going to absolutely wallop you.
But what did they think was going to happen? Like if you said this, they've been printing money for 10 years. This has been under a Conservative government for 13 years. What are these individuals? What is their logic?
It's called groupthink, Bev. It's called confirmation bias. It's called arrogance. It's called thinking that you know better than everyone else outside your little bubble. Yeah. The Bank of England, from Mark Carney onwards, has been riven with groupthink. The Monetary Policy Committee, it doesn't appoint economists who actually, think differently, heterodox thinkers, think outside the box. I know many of them, and they never get a look in because you have to be one of the Treasury's approved, nice, shiny people that thinks the same way as everyone else. We've got a disease in this country. We don't like clever people who are outsiders, but we need those clever outsiders to make good decisions.
But quoted on the front page of The Times, Karen Ward, a managing director of JP Morgan, an advisor to Jeremy Hunt, saying the Bank of England governor got this wrong.
Well, almost everyone is now saying the Bank of England governor got it wrong.
Which is why his nickname is the Plank of England, and he deserves it.
But I would still say to get rid of the governor now in the middle of a crisis is just... it would be panic stations, and it would cause more pain on the ordinary British people trying to weather their mortgage, trying to weather their personal loans.
It might be what some parts of the media
could do it. Andy Haldane, who was his deputy, could come back.
He could, but I don't think you change horses in the middle of a race.
Right.
I think that's the wrong thing to do. And no one's been, as I say earlier, and more forthright than me. But this is not just politics where somebody resigns and goes back to their big house in the country.
No.
This is financial markets. This is really serious stuff. This is not theatre. This is what determines, people's lives in terms of financial outcomes. And there's nothing more important.
So what is happening right now at the Bank of England? Take us behind the scenes.
So what's happening right now is they've been meeting for the last 2 days.
This is the 9 people on the
They will have already made the decision, because there are, as we speak, economists and economics editors like me who are locked in. There's a kind of a room in the Bank of England. I've been there many times. You have to check in your phone, check in all your devices,
check in your brain.
You get given the information, you get given the press release, and then you can write your piece. So then when 12 o'clock comes and the decision is made available to the world, you can press a button and it's instantly published on your newspaper website. I'm not there because I've been talking to you, and I'm going to be standing outside the Bank of England on camera at 12 noon when this decision is made.
And will it be 1/4 or 0.5%?
I think it will probably be 1/4 on balance, but there are lots of people calling for 1/2 now. And so that will be an increase in interest rates from 4.5 to 4.75, the 13th successive increase in interest rates. I actually think, and this will surprise a lot of people, having called for rate rises way before practically anyone else in the British commentariat, I actually think this latest rate rise is a mistake. They should hold fire now, because you've already got 12 rises in the tank. They take a long time to come through. We should be focusing on convincing financial markets that we are going to start reversing this quantitative easing, this massive increase in the money supply that we've seen. That is the way. That is one way to get down inflation, as well as removing some taxes.
And net zero.
Let's take the levies off your energy bill. The net zero levies off your energy bill. Let's take VAT off fuel. There's 5% off there. That will help lower prices.
It will put money back in people's pockets, and it would cut inflation overnight.
Absolutely.
Why don't they do it?
Because politicians don't like to be seen to be changing their minds.
Because they're signed up to that ludicrous, ruinous net zero.
I think that is part of it, but I think the main reason for the inflation we've got now is massive money creation.
Even Germany are abandoning a lot of these.
So Germany, even though the Greens are in power, they have taken their net zero levies off household energy bills, and we should do the same, in my view.
Yeah, and it's a coalition with the Green Party.
Absolutely, the Green Party are in power, and even they can do it, but apparently we can't.
I've been handed some views. I do want to get to one before you go, which I do have to have an answer to this question, which is from Ian. If you're watching, Ian, bear with me. But Alan has said, Alan said Liam Halligan by far the best financial commentator on British television. Quite right. John has said, what I don't understand is why we're paying so much for our electric bills. We all have a green levy on our power bills to fund all these solars and windmills. So the British consumer paid for and owns these windmills. It's a messy situation. Complicated.
How long you got?
Yeah, quite. This is the question that we have to get to, Liam.
Is it about my underpants?
Did you manage to get your underpants and shirt yesterday?
I did manage.
I heard this, right? Just to explain, I was in my kitchen. Your mic was still live when you were leaving. You obviously, it wasn't your fault. And Liam said, I've got to go because I've got to go and buy a new shirt and some underpants.
I said, can you spare me for an hour, guys, on the desk? Can I not be on telly for an hour because I've got to go and buy some underpants? Let me tell you, I came to work on Monday morning.
Are you an M&S underpants man?
Come on. I came to work, there other underpants are available. I came to work on Monday morning and I haven't been home. I've literally not been home.
Have you not had a shower in that
I have, because I've been staying in hotels in and around Paddington.
Right.
I'm not going to make it home until Friday because I'm going to Barnsley tonight with Nigel.
It's nothing personal, but I just moved a little further away.
You know what? It cheered me up no end when I was doing washing up in the kitchen yesterday afternoon, that, Liam. Right, thank you.
Liam will be back with us throughout the programme. Just to remind you that we'll get the decision at noon. Liam saying he'd rather they didn't, but we pretty much think they're going to.
It's almost certainly. Rates are going to rise.
OK,
Liam Halligan, who has got his clean underpants on.
The British Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, has ruled himself out of contention for the position of NATO Secretary-General.
Right. This is the official line. He said he's withdrawing because of unresolved issues within the organisation, that in the United States wants the current Chief, Jen Stoltenberg, to continue in the role. Effectively, Joe Biden stopped the British candidate taking the role.
So the French believe that NATO Secretary-General should come from within the European Union, apparently. Con Coughlin is the defence editor at The Telegraph and joins us now. Good morning, Con. Just unravel this for us here. This is a bit of politics going on with everybody making the statements that they want us to hear.
where it's a very murky affair. And I think, first of all, Ben Wallace did want this job. And Ben Wallace has been lobbying for this job for about the last year. I mean, every NATO summit, every trip he makes abroad, the number one item on his agenda is make me NATO Secretary General. So there's no doubt that where Ben wants this to go. But as you say, he's run into some pretty stiff opposition, both from America, but also from within Europe. Both France and Germany, I understand, are not happy at the prospect, not just of Mr. Wallace getting a job, but a British politician getting this plum job. And that opposition has now persuaded Mr. Wallace to throw in the towel. That's according to The Economist.
Con, why is it a matter for Biden? I know they're the biggest contributors to NATO. Is it as crude as that? That's why they've got so much clout over who is or isn't the Secretary General?
Well, that's a good question, Andrew. I mean, I think, first of all, I think Whitehall will be very disappointed that the Biden administration is playing up in this way, given that basically after the US, Britain has been the most forthright and supportive ally of the Ukrainians since Russia invaded last year. So, I mean, I think there will be an enormous amount of disappointment on this. I mean, the Americans say they want continuity and they want Stoltenberg to stay for another year. And I can see that makes sense because, you know, we've got this very problematic issue of whether to give Ukraine membership of NATO. And I think, you know, that needs to be worked through. But the other thing is, I think basically France and Germany are really deeply opposed to having a British leader of NATO because of Brexit. Scholz in Germany was humiliated by Ben Wallace when earlier this year the Germans were playing up over allowing tanks to go to Ukraine. So Scholz is sort of in a sulk over that. And of course, the French want to see, even though the French have a very problematic relationship with NATO historically, they want to make sure there's an EU candidate for the post. So it's a very murky situation.
Isn't it?
Certainly.
Con, we've got to move on. I'm so sorry. We're a bit short on time there. Con Coughlin there from the Telegraph, but thank you so much. More on the Titan sub next. This is To The Point on GB News, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, this is The Point on GB News. What time is it? Oh, it's 10 o'clock already. That first half an hour went quite quickly, didn't it? It's me, Bev Turner, and Andrew Pearce this morning. Lots to pack in the show.
It's the big race against time, of course, in the Atlantic. They're trying to find hours to go, frankly, before we think the oxygen's going to run out on the Titan submersible. There's a great number of rescue ships converged on the scene, so we're praying for a successful outcome.
It's a flotilla, basically, that's embarking upon that particular area. Also
2 hours'
morning,
time.
Oh, interest rates. We're going to hear from the Bank of England what rate they're going to put it up to. We just had Liam Halligan in the studio. He thinks it could be as much as 0.5%. Hopefully no more than 0.25% on our interest rates.
No, 13th consecutive rise. What are they doing in the Bank of England? The Bank of England governor's nickname is the Plank of England. Of course, we're also going to talk about the 70th anniversary of the Windrush generation. We're talking to a Conservative MP whose own family were part of that Windrush generation who came here to Britain in 75 years.
First of all, though, here is your news this morning with Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Bev. Good morning. It is 1 minute past 10. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The US Coast Guard says the search is being expanded of the area where noises have been heard as time is running out for the missing tourist submersible, the Titan. Aircraft and 10 ships are searching 10,000 square miles of the North Atlantic, while 2 remote-controlled submersibles use sonar to monitor under the surface. Latalant, carrying state-of-the-art ROV, has arrived in the area, according to website marinetraffic.com. British deep-water salvage company Magellan is en route to aid in the rescue. 5 people are inside the craft that lost contact with the surface on Sunday. Retired commander from Royal Australian Navy Frank Owen says it will be difficult to find the submersible.
The only vehicle that can probably bring it to the surface is the US Navy's deep salvage remotely operated vehicle that should be on scene on the site by now, but it needs to know where it's to go to. It's not really a search asset, it's a recovery asset. So, and then it will take time, perhaps 2 hours, to get down to 4,000 metres.
The Bank of England is set to increase the interest rate for a 13th consecutive time later as it tries to tackle ongoing price rises. The latest figures published yesterday showed inflation was stuck at 8.7% in May. The interest rate, currently at 4.5%, remains the bank's primary tool to lower inflation. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, says the government's doing all it can to halve inflation.
The Prime Minister is committed to bringing those interest rates down, halve those interest rates this year, to grow the economy, to reduce debt. This is absolutely the economic focus of the government, and we will be taking action to drive those things forward. And I think it is the duty of government. We are relentlessly focused on that.
Well, amid rising inflation, Labour's called on banks to provide support to homeowners facing mortgage payment difficulties. The party claims their 5-point plan would allow borrowers to switch to interest-only payments or extend their mortgage terms. The government says lenders are already required to engage with struggling customers. Shadow Financial Secretary James Murray told GB News Labour's plan should be taken into account.
Government should follow our 5-point plan that we set out today, which would require lenders to allow borrowers to switch to interest-only mortgages for a temporary time period or extend the length of their mortgage term. And it would also require lenders to wait a minimum of 6 months before initiating any repossession proceedings. You know, that's the kind of targeted help that we need.
Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has ruled himself out of the race to become the next NATO chief. When asked about leading the alliance, he told The Economist he was withdrawing because of unresolved issues within the organisation. He also stated the US wants the current Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg to continue in the role. He's due to step down in September. King Charles says the Windrush generation has made a significant difference to the UK, praising its legacy as profound and permanent. 75 years after the first crossing from the Caribbean, the King will be among those at a service held at Windsor Castle later, marking the anniversary. A £1 million fundraising effort's also underway to recover the anchor from the ship that made the crossing and put it on display. HMT Empire Windrush sank off the coast of Algeria in 1954. The search for a firefighter who went missing while attempting a charity swim across the English Channel has been called off. Ian Hughes was raising money for charities including the British Heart Foundation and Midlands Air Ambulance. The 42-year-old was being accompanied by a support boat but went missing in French waters on Tuesday. Convenience stores are urging the police to create a most wanted list of thieves as shoplifting incidents reach record levels. According to the Association of Convenience Stores, more than 1 million thefts were reported last year. High-value items like meat, alcohol and confectionery are frequently stolen, ACS says, often by individuals with addictions or connected to organised crime. And King Charles and Queen Camilla's hopes of victory at Royal Ascot were dashed on the second day as 2 of their horses missed out on trophies. The royal couple entered their thoroughbred Reach for the Moon in the Royal Hunt Cup. Their other horse, Circle of Fire, also took part but was beaten by jockey Frankie Dettori riding a horse named Gregory. This is GB News. We're bringing more as it happens. Now, though, it's back over to Bev and Andrew.
Good morning, it's 10:07. Thank you for joining us. Time is running out in the race to rescue the 5 men trapped on board the Titan submersible. As an estimate that the oxygen supply could run out any moment.
Speaking last night, Coast Guard Captain Jamie Frederick said he had hoped those on board could still be saved.
When you're in the middle of a search and rescue case, you always have hope. That's why we're doing what we do. With respect to the noises specifically, we don't know what they are. To be frank with you, the P3 detected noises. That's why they're up there. That's why they're doing what they're doing. That's why they put sonar buoys in the water. The good news is, what I can tell you is we're searching in the area where the noises were detected, and we'll continue to do so. This is a search and rescue mission, 100%. We are smack dab in the middle of search and rescue, and we'll continue to put every available asset that we have in an effort to find the Titan and the crew members.
So the search is currently focused on a point in the North Atlantic where the sound of banging was detected, with a French vessel carrying a state-of-the-art underwater robot on its way to the area.
Of course, we don't know if the bang is still continuing. Paul Hawkins, our national reporter, joins us in studio. Paul, we've had an interesting email here from Andy on the Scottish Borders. He said, I noticed when Paul and Andrew talked about this area of sea activity being unregulated. This isn't quite true. The vehicle which plumbed to deeper depths in the Mariana Trench was built to classification standards and certification. The fact is the company chose not to have the Titan built to class as they believed it hampered innovation. As a former seafarer, involved heavily with various classification societies, I now see more than ever the value and reassurance they can provide.
Was that a submarine or a submersible that sank to the bottom of the Mariana Trench?
I'm not sure.
Know. There is a bit of a. I was reading this morning actually. The manned underwater and if they're a seafarer, I'm sure they know more about it than me, by the way. But the Manned Underwater Vehicles Committee of the Marine Technology Society, they wrote to the OceanGate chief executive Stockton Rush, who's on the Titan, in 2018, and specifically expressed concern over the company's compliance with a maritime risk assessment certification. Will Conan from the Marine Technology Society said there are 10 submarines in the world that can go 12,000 feet and deeper. All of them are certified except the OceanGate submersible. Note, he said there are 10 submarines in the world, not a submersible, which is, of course, the difference being that a submersible has kind of little thrusters, but really it needs to be deployed and it sinks effectively. It kind of goes to the bottom. It can't move about by its own propulsion. So maybe that's how they got around it.
And what's the latest from the rescue site? We've seen a number of ships converting on the scene, Paul.
Yeah, we've been monitoring the marinetraffic.com. We've been watching some of the ships as they're making their way to the site of the wreckage of the Titanic. The most interesting ship is the L'Athlon. That's the French scientific vessel, that's carrying the state-of-the-art ROV, remote operated vehicle, Victor 6000. State-of-the-art cameras, sensors, robotic arms. They're hoping that once it gets down there and it can reach the bottom, it can, first of all, locate, along with the other ROVs, where it is, but also it can use its robotic arms to either free it from the wreckage or attach a hook from a US naval wreckage ship that's making its way to the site and then hook it and bring it back to the surface, which, as you pointed out before, that could take a couple of hours, and hours is all we've got left.
And ours is all we've got. Paul, thank you for that. We'll stay on this subject now because joining us is former Royal Navy officer, Rear Admiral Chris Parry. Chris, good morning to you.
Good morning, everybody.
Time is the essence, isn't it?
I'm afraid time's up. I don't think there's any prospect of getting these people back alive now.
What makes you say that, Chris? What makes you think that you can be so resolute about that at this stage?
Well, because the maximum time was 96 hours. They disappeared 92 hours ago. They haven't found Titan yet, and it's going to take more than 4 hours to get them up to the surface. So I think we have to be realistic and say at the moment, obviously we'll allow some time for, extra margin perhaps a day, but I think we need to, I'm afraid, look at the worst here.
Chris, do you think that the fact we know some of the families are on the mothership, the wives, would they have been prepared for this?
I don't think anybody's prepared for a tragedy like this. It comes at you with a shock. You think it's a routine activity. It isn't, of course. I'm sure the risks probably weren't explained at all to the people concerned. As we know, the company itself was very irresponsible in the way it actually, I'm afraid, put out this business and also put their technology in the water. I think there are going to be heavy recriminations in relation to whether the vehicle itself was actually seaworthy and whether it should have been down at that depth. I think you've catalogued already the history behind it. And this is a fundamentally unsafe operation, and an accident was bound to happen at some stage.
It's so interesting hearing you speak, Chris, because you sound incredibly frustrated. I can sense this frustration in your voice, that as somebody that understands the magnitude of the ocean and that it's something that you underestimate at your peril, that's effectively what you're saying here.
Yeah, if you're going to go down 4 kilometres into the ocean, we're talking about, quite a long way. Everything has to go right every time.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid the odds were stacked against this expedition right from the start. If you look at the flimsy nature of the technology, the very dodgy certification that has occurred up until now, and I would say the bravado of the people promoting it, there's something seriously wrong. I'm also concerned about the fact it took 8 hours to actually raise the alarm after they lost contact with this vehicle. That suggests to me things have gone wrong in the past, and they've gone, oh, you know what, they normally take about 8 hours to come back to the surface. We'll just wait. Well, on this occasion, they didn't. And I think OceanGate has got a lot to answer for.
Well, we know, because, Chris, we do know that there have been communications issues with the Titan before contact was lost. And perhaps that's, again, you're right, perhaps that's why they didn't raise the alarm for 8 hours, because they thought, oh, this has happened before.
Yeah, exactly. But it's not good practice. The minute you lose your safety signal, you should be very worried indeed. If it were a submarine, a Royal Navy submarine, we would say that was a submiss situation, and we would start the procedure to try and locate it and recover it. I just think it was irresponsible to actually put this vehicle down. It's had a history, very dodgy history of certification, and I think some questions need to be answered. I mean, the key issue here is this is a totally unregulated area. If you look to see who should be actually applying standards and all the safety issues here, it's not like that. This is the equivalent of building a kit car and saying to somebody, look, come for a drive. And I think, you know, as I said, somebody needs to look at this very seriously afterwards. I just think the legal implications will be horrendous. But right now, obviously, we allow some time to see if people can survive. But given the fact we haven't located it yet, you know, it's going to take hours to actually get the essentially the American system. It's called a Curve 21 down to it. They've got a great record of recovering aircraft from 20,000 feet. They've recovered a helicopter and a fixed-wing aircraft in the last 4 years. And that attaches basically to a very sophisticated American deep salvage piece of kit, which is basically crane, winch, and a wire. But that's going to take hours. I mean, we're talking 10 hours. So I'm afraid to say, sorry.
Sorry, Chris. If they could have got that equipment to the vessel 2 days ago, then they would have had a good chance.
Well, you've got to find it first. I think people have underestimated the challenge of finding this. It's only 20 feet long. You're in a huge debris field from Titanic herself, and you're in a series of canyons and hills. The nature of the bottom is very complex indeed. You know, this whole banging saga has been really spurious as well. The thought that you would actually bang from the inside of a carbon fibre hull is ridiculous, frankly, and people like myself have been trained in the past to differentiate between that sort of noise and the other mechanical noises that you get in the background. It's given people false hope. I understand why, because they wanted to maintain morale, but I think it was a distraction, to tell you the truth. And I haven't seen any evidence of any survival since contact was lost on Sunday.
Just finally, Chris, I mean, I'm a layman, you're the expert here, but I still find it amazing that this tiny little submersible, 22 feet, was allowed to go to the bottom and that there was no attachment to the mothership. Could there not have been a cable linking it so they had contact with it the whole time? I asked about that earlier, in an earlier programme, was told, too expensive. Well, hang on, these people are billionaires. But also the cable could have the currents could have been problematic for the cable. But surely it would have been, if practical, a safer option.
Well, it's a good point, isn't it? Because the remote operating vehicles that have been lowered from the rescue ships have actually got cables on them.
Exactly.
So it answers your question. Yes, it could. I mean, more simply than that, you could have trailed a wire with a buoy that was on the surface.
Yeah.
So, you know, you can have 4 miles of very, very thin wire. Right. Submarines use it all the time. And you could have had a buoy on the surface. There's all sorts of things you could have done. The most important thing is it could have had a sort of thing that aircraft have, which is a black box pinger, which allows you to locate the black box. It's cheap, it's available. It could have gone in the submersible. But I'm afraid to say, if you look at the company's website, they say, look, you know, we're a bit impatient with dealing with regulators and people who ask questions. We find it gets in the way of innovation. Well, if you've got that sort of attitude, safety is not going to be at the top of your concerns. And as I said, I'm pretty indignant about the way these people were exposed to these sorts of risks.
Yeah.
I mean, let's ask all 4 of us. Would we have gone in that?
No.
Not in a million years.
No. And
No.
and if I was a parent, I would not have allowed my 19-year-old son to go in there either, Chris.
All right, thank you so much.
I'm afraid to say the risks just weren't calibrated by people. You and I do it every day of the week. Just a simple thing, two simple things. You're being bolted into it with 17 bolts. You can't get out. That's the first thing. That would have me pretty windy. And secondly, I'm being asked to sign a chit that says that they're not going to be responsible for injury, emotional trauma, or death.
Yeah.
I mean, that should scream red flag at you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you so much.
We're all sympathetic. It's a hateful situation. I've been in loads of search and rescue situations, and you hope against hope you can actually save people. But I have to say the odds are vanishingly small. Yeah. I'm an optimist by nature, but I worry a lot, and this is very worrying.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Former Royal Navy officer, Rear Admiral Chris Parry there.
Very frank.
And it reminds me so much, it's bringing it all flooding back to me, because like I've mentioned a couple of times, my ex-husband used to, when he gave up his professional sport and he became an adventurer, right? So he rode the Atlantic with his mate Ben Fogle in a tiny little boat. They went across the Antarctic. He did loads of stuff like that. And I was always in on those meetings. And there was a sort of an insouciance. It'll be fine, it'll be fine. All these blokes all want to do this stuff. And I would be the only voice of reason in the room saying, well, hang on a minute. What if this happens? What if And when he actually did, when the worst did happen and he got walloped by a truck, I'd only agreed to him doing that trip because they said he'd have safety vehicles in front and behind him at all times on the road with lights flashing and he'd be safe. And when he got hit, they were all in bed. And it was... So I can sort of sympathise with the women in the background of this story who might have said, are you sure, are you sure, are you sure? And all these blokes with their very deep pockets are going, yeah, it's fine, we're going to be fine.
But some very practical points. Why hasn't it got a black box?
Yeah, obvious.
You find it in no time at all?
So you can keep sending a signal back.
And as I say, if the rescue modules they're sending down are on a cable winch, why wasn't the Titan?
Yeah.
I never understood that from the beginning.
Well, like Chris said there is this idea and the vibe from their website, all their advertising is, we push the boundaries. Like, they pride themselves, in a way. They seem to pride themselves on the fact that they were maverick and radical. All very well, until it goes wrong.
And there's a thin line, isn't there, between taking risks and being irresponsible.
Yeah, absolutely. And
they've crossed that line.
Very much so. Which is sad and it's tragic and it's awful.
And we're still praying and hoping for the best.
Maybe.
But we talked to our former Royal Navy submarine commander yesterday who said the word tragedy in the first sentence. And I said, was that a Freudian slip?
Awful.
It wasn't.
Awful.
He said then, it's over. Still to come, we're going to be speaking to our North West of England reporter, Sophie Reaper, signing out people feeling ahead of today's interest rate announcement, which is coming up at midday.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 10:25. You're with To The Point on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So experts are warning that a recession could now be inevitable as there are predictions that the Bank of England could hike interest rates by 0.5% today.
With the bank's 13th consecutive rise and comes as inflation remains stubbornly high at 8.7%. It didn't fall at all last month.
No. Our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper joins us from Manchester this morning for a special breakfast People's panel. What are folks saying there, Sophie, about this impending decision?
Well, a very good morning to you both. We are at the Mess Cafe in Wythenshawe in Manchester, like you say, for our People's panel, joined by 3 very lovely people this morning. So let's get right into them and start asking them about the crucial issues, as you say there. So, Ian, we'll come to yourself first. You suffer with a disability and are therefore on universal credit. Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about that, how that is impacting you, given the cost of living and inflation.
It basically means that you have to cut your cloth, and it basically means that you have to kind of watch what you buy and be careful of what you buy. It basically means that you look in the cupboards and see, right, I've got, 6 tins of soup, I can make 6 lunches out of that and make it last until you actually really do need to make a big shop and then plan your shop ahead.
So it's really quite a difficult thing, isn't it, to balance? Yeah. Nicole, I know you're a working mum. We've been talking this morning about how you're balancing it all. I know you've taken on a part-time job. Talk to me about how that's impacting you, but also I know we've talked about we're coming up to the school holidays. How is that going to impact working parents up and down the country as well?
So as a self-employed businesswoman, I have just taken on a part-time job to be able to actually cope with the demands of the rising costs. And interestingly, yesterday I spoke to 4 businesswomen, all working mums, who've also taken on part-time jobs as well. Coming up to the summer holidays, though, we are in a situation where how are these people supposed to be able to afford to pay for childcare when we are looking at £320 a week for 2 children, and they want that money up front in an advance. And as Ian was saying then with universal credit, for anybody who is on universal credit, they cannot actually claim any of that percentage back until after the child has already been through the childcare. So until September, they wouldn't be able to claim any of that money back. So they're looking to have to find probably well over £1,000 just to put their children into childcare for a few weeks throughout the summer holidays before they've even worked. So yeah, things are stretched.
I mean, it's something that we're seeing not just in Wythenshawe, not just in Manchester, all over the UK. It's affecting our communities. Arinma, you are a community activist. You work in Moss Side with your community. How are you seeing people in the community being impacted by the cost of living and inflation?
Well, basically what we're seeing is that it's local grassroots individuals and families that are actually, paying for this rising living cost. They're already working 2 and 3 jobs. They don't have much money as it is, but then energy bills are going up and they're still having to find more money doing extra work. Cost of living is going up, cost of food is going up, and we're finding it's the local people that are being made to pay for this cost of living crisis, and it's not their crisis. It's not their crisis. They're already living in crisis. In our area, again, down in Moss Side, we have a lot of people that don't even have access to public funds, no recourse to public funds. So where are they supposed to get the extra money from? They just don't have any money.
Well, that is the big question, of course, and we'll be with the People's Panel here in Manchester for the rest of today, asking those really crucial questions and getting the answers with the People's Channel, and we're here today with the people.
Thank you, Sophie. It's really good to know how this is affecting people. It is so difficult out there at the moment.
And it's going to get a lot worse.
Yeah.
Small businesses, people worrying about their mortgage rates. And don't forget, people who are renting homes, their rents are going up because landlords have to put the rent up because their mortgages have gone up. Affects everybody.
Absolutely. Let's understand this in a little bit more detail. Joining us now is the CEO of Glacier Environmental Fund and author of Planet Ponzi, Mitch Firestein. Mitch, great to see you. This is something that you've been warning about for a long time. Just give us your assessment of why we've got into this situation.
Well, thanks for having me, Bev. Look, it was predictable. It's not a victory lap that I'm very proud of, but I mean, the politicians should know. And I think that there's been some significant issues with what we're talking about here. I mean, this is the worst cost of living crisis in UK history, and we have a consistent theme. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
Yeah, with a consistent theme that's a lack of leadership and regulation and oversight. So this has led to the largest malinvestment in the history of the United Kingdom. We have, James Cleverly came on and said that it's because of the war with Russia. That's just inaccurate and not really true, because if you look at the price of crude oil, if you pull out a chart, the price of crude oil is lower now than it was in February of 2020. Before the outbreak of the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. So these energy prices are lower. So that's just untrue. That's the first part that's untrue. The second part that's untrue is that Ukraine is going to win, and that's a determinant factor. That's not really the case. So now what we've got to talk about as well is that public-private partnership. Whenever you hear that triple P, public-private partnership to ensure war insurance on Ukraine, and we're investing $3 billion when people can't put food on the tables for their families or pay for their electricity in this country. This is not right, as far as I'm concerned. The UK also has a debt addiction problem. We spent $20 billion more than we took in revenues last month, which is part of the problem. We have a problem with our pensions and property markets. So the fiscal profligacy from the Bank of England since Mervyn King, Mark Carney, and where we are today has caused this mess. It's not Brexit. It's not COVID. It's not Russia. It's bad leadership, lack of accountability, and lack of enforcement of existing regulations. We've got an invasion by illegal immigrants piling over the borders, an opaque amount of spending of our billions of dollars where we have no say over anything anymore. And if you make comments that people don't like, you get censored everywhere. And you're not allowed to have a reasonable conversation or debate anymore. So the whole culture has changed. So what does the Bank of England, that's way behind the curve, they've raised too little, too late, and this is hurting people. Food inflation is up over 20%. The numbers that came out yesterday illustrated 16.7%, which is understating. All of these numbers that are released, these statistics, understate the real cost to people. I mean, you've got a panel up there in Manchester. You tell me how much prices have increased on your food. I know how much they've increased on my food. Yeah. It's way over what the government is telling you. It's disingenuous to represent that. People aren't stupid.
Mitch, could I ask you very briefly, because we're under pressure on time here, Mitch, a very simple solution would be what they've done in Germany, which is in a green coalition. We could strip out these wretched green taxes in our electric and gas bills, which would be an immediate release for families, and it would cut inflation overnight.
Well, I know that needs to be done, but we have bigger problems because the pension situation has not been remedied. Neither has the commercial property and residential property bubble that's set to explode. That has to be dealt with. As interest rates go up, families can't afford their mortgages. And to come on GB News with the, James Cleverly and say what he said. It's just disingenuous. So we've got undervalued commodities right now. There are silver linings for people who see what's coming next, which, I can help you guys navigate through this crisis. But, we need to listen to alternative voices. I've called this right, but our government has called it entirely wrong, and nobody's ever held to account. And that's the problem. Look, I'm not saying that Keir Starmer has a silver bullet, because he certainly doesn't. But what I'm saying is the people who have got it incredibly wrong need to be held to account, and their feet need to be held to the fire. Otherwise, we're just going to repeat this, and it's going to be worse next time. We are headed for a crisis. Now it's unavoidable.
Thank you, Mitch. Always great to have your insight, Mitch Feinstein there. And you can actually find him on Twitter at Planet Ponzi if you want to hear a little bit more of his assessment. Right, we have got a lot more, but we are late for the news with Rhiannon.
Good morning. It's 10:30 for your top stories from the GB newsroom. The US Coast Guard says the search for the missing Titanic submersible has been expanded as it enters its critical phase. Aircraft and 10 ships are searching 10,000 square miles of the North Atlantic, while 2 remote-controlled submersibles use sonar to monitor under the surface. Latalant, carrying state-of-the-art ROV, has now arrived in the area, according to website marinetraffic.com. British deepwater salvage company Magellan is also en route. 5 people are inside the craft that lost contact with the surface on Sunday. The Bank of England is set to increase the interest rate for a 13th consecutive time later as it tries to tackle ongoing price rises. The latest figures, published yesterday, showed inflation was stuck at 8.7% in May. The interest rate, currently at 4.5%, remains the bank's primary tool to lower inflation. Amid rising inflation, Labour's called on banks to provide support to homeowners facing mortgage payment difficulties. The party claims their 5-point plan would allow borrowers to switch to interest-only payments or extend their mortgage terms. The government says lenders are already required to engage with struggling customers. And King Charles says the Windrush generation has made a significant difference to the UK, praising its legacy as profound and permanent. 75 years after the first crossing from the Caribbean, the King will be among those at the service held at Windsor Castle later to mark the anniversary. A £1 million fundraising effort's also underway to recover the anchor from the ship that made the crossing. HMT Empire Windrush sank off the coast of Algeria in 1954. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2784 and €1.1624. The price of gold is £1,508.17 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,492 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Coming up next, we're going to be speaking to Conservative MP Darren Henry, who's going to talk to us about the Windrush Day grant scheme, which brought his family here because it's the 75th anniversary.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us. It's 10:40. This is To The Point on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Well, today marks the anniversary of the arrival in 1948 of Empire Windrush, one of the first ships to carry West Indian migrants to the UK's Britain during the post-war period.
In January, the government opened applications for the Windrush Day Grant Scheme. Community groups, charities and councils were invited to bid for their share of a £750,000 funding pot to mark the 75th anniversary.
Well, the Tory MP for Broxlow, Darren Henry, joins us now. Darren, morning to you. Your family were part of the first wave, I think, that came here 75 years ago. Tell us more.
Oh, good morning. Thanks very much for inviting me on. By the way, I'm the first Conservative MP of West Indian heritage, and I'm very, very proud of that. My parents came here, my mum in 1965 by boat and my dad in 1961 by plane. And they came here, they were proud, they wanted to work hard and get on in life, and that's what they achieved.
Was the reception always warm and welcome, Darren? Because we know there's been those stories about signs in various windows in London homes saying, we probably don't need to go into the detail, but no Irish, no gypsies, and I think I could be blunt, it said no blacks.
Absolutely, and we did have that. We had the prejudice, and of course, the people from the West Indies, they came here, coming to the motherland, so it was quite a shock, the mother country, Great Britain, to get that kind of reception when they got here. My own parents, who wanted to work hard and get on, my dad was working night shifts in a factory of Vauxhall Motors, my mum was working 2 to 10 shifts, they were passing night shifts in the night, and they were doing that because they wanted to own their own home. So they came along to a house, wanted to buy it, sorry, not there. The same story everywhere they went until a white solicitor then inquired about a home, and guess what? They were available. So we have our own personal experience of that. What's the response to that? To be resilient, to carry on, and they always owned their own home when I grew up, and they got on in life. And things have changed now, we've moved on.
Darren, when did you decide you wanted to become an MP?
Well, I was served in the Royal Air Force, and of course that's really important given that it's Armed Forces Week this week. I served for many years, and of course many of the people from the Caribbean came over here. When you're talking into the 60–70% came here having served in the armed forces and wanted to rebuild this country after the war. That's what they came here to do. Myself, it was all about, I was in the forces. I believe in, defence of the realm is our priority for this country. I didn't feel I needed to be political when I was in the services. I mean, that's something that people do now. But when I left, I was a logistics officer and I worked briefly in business as a general manager of a food distribution company, and found that I wasn't really a business person. I liked public service. So I became a councillor, ran a youth club and became a county councillor and now an MP. So that's my journey. But why Conservative? Because my parents worked really, really hard, all those night shifts and everything else. And I think if you work hard, you should be able to get on in life. And that's a principle I hold by, and that's why I'm a Conservative MP.
And Darren, did your mum and dad, are they glad they made that decision to come here?
Absolutely, absolutely. This was the land of opportunity. And of course, that's exactly what they found when they came here. They were able to get on. Yes, there were bumps in the road, there are setbacks, but they were very, very resilient. And I put part of that through the engagement that the Caribbean people did with this country, and some fantastic role models like Sir Trevor McDonald that came here. It showed people that, we are just people. And, we have hopes and dreams as well. And we live in a country, Great Britain, where those hopes and dreams can come true. My parents found that. I'm very proud of them for delivering on that in their lives.
Where are we at now, Darren, do you think, in terms of racial equality and getting rid of discrimination in the UK? We heard, I think, yesterday that Angela Rayner is going to be the diversity czar for the Labour Party. Does that feel a little bit outdated to you now?
I think it is, personally. I think, true leadership should be, from the Prime Minister down or whatever field you're in and you're acting as a leader. The equalities is something that you should think about. Your duty of care is something that you should think about as a manager, regardless. Why have a separate person just thinking about, the plight of black people? I just think it's inappropriate. We're part of the fabric of society. We're inclusive. And there are setbacks and there are issues, but it's how you respond to that. You're in a country now where you can flourish, and that is fantastic. My parents did, and I hope to emulate that.
Darren, just finally, I bet your mum and dad were very proud of you becoming an MP.
Well, they visited Parliament, and it is a very, very special place. And I'm always thinking that. And my parents think that because they've watched everything on television all these years, and now I'm here. But I'm here to make a difference. I've had a career. I've had 3 careers now. My children are growing up now. I'm 100% focused on working hard for my constituents, but I actually feel I have the tools to do it. My parents know that, and so they wish me well, and they've enjoyed their visit to Parliament.
All right.
Super, thank
Lovely
you.
to talk to you. Darren Henry, who's the Conservative MP for Broxtowe. Thanks for joining us. I've just checked, his dad, Harry, came from Jamaica, his mum, Gloria, from Trinidad. Nice bloke, isn't he?
Why don't we see more MPs like that on the telly? We've seen how many times do we do this?
I know. He's terrific.
We interview good, hard-working MPs that no one's heard of, and we realise there are good people in politics. Sam Lister and Emma Wolf are with us now. Am I right, ladies? Like, why do we see... Sometimes we see these idiots at the top of government pulling strings out. No, I'm sorry, that wasn't terrible.
I'm not going to go down that road.
Any political hue. I mean, any political hue at all. I don't hold Keir Starmer in any higher admiration than I do Rishi Sunak at the moment.
I'd vote for him as Prime Minister over our current
Why is that,
There are
Sam?
loads of great MPs in Parliament,
There are.
but it's obviously the ones who do bad things who make the news. So,
But is it also something about the ones who climb the greasy pole, who don't necessarily have the integrity of a wonderful man like Darren Henry?
No, I mean, I think the whole point of getting into politics is because you want to get things done. So if you don't want to climb the greasy pole, you want want to question why you're actually there. If you want to get things done in politics, you want to get to the top. It's very difficult to achieve stuff as a backbencher. I mean, it's not impossible, but obviously you have to really be at the top to do that.
So you've got to want to be a power-hungry megalomaniac, Emma.
Climbing the greasy pole involves lots of, time-wasting stuff and not doing the kind of things that Darren is clearly doing and working for your constituency. Yeah. But as you say, if you're not at the top of the greasy totem pole, then you can't get things done. But then the minute you're there, you're then, on TV the whole time, or, arranging your department. You're not actually doing things. So
that's the beauty of our democracy, is that we've got those at the top doing the, the kind of government stuff, but then we've got the backbenchers out doing the hard work, like Darren. So it's a nicely balanced system, in my opinion.
Exactly.
Says the political editor of the Daily Express, very diplomatically. Right, let's talk about the biggest story, guys. The clock is ticking. It is 10 to 11 now. We are hearing mixed reports about the oxygen that might be left on the Titan sub. Emma, it's just a tragedy, this story.
It feels as though this is an inevitable tragedy, a suicide mission, one might even say. I just keep thinking about those families, those relatives waiting when you don't know. I think humans can deal with pretty much anything, but it's like Madeleine McCann's parents, it's not knowing, and the longer they wait, they wait and wait, and it's been 5 days, how many days?
Well, Sunday.
Sunday.
They lost contact late Sunday morning.
And they just have to keep hoping. But, we keep hearing about the number of breathable hours of air of oxygen that are left, dwindling food, dwindling water. Are these noises something significant? Are they not?
And they won't have had many supplies anyway, Emma, because it was an 8-hour journey.
It was an 8-hour journey, and they've been down there, as you say, since Sunday.
5 days.
And one wonders, and the cramped space, and the knowledge that every mouthful of air they take is running out.
And the awful thing, Sam, about this story, because it is a story, it's the most sort of tragedy, it's the worst tragedy. It's got a beginning, a middle and an end. We're looking at the pictures of the Twitter feed. Everybody's jolly, they're all excited before they go, and now it just looks really, really bleak.
It does, but I think that Emma uses the phrase suicide mission. Actually, the Sun and various newspapers today cover the fact that there was a German adventurer 2 years ago who went on this, and he described it as a suicide mission. He said bits were falling off it.
Terrible.
And so how was it ever allowed to...
Because it's not regulated properly.
To be operated in this way, I think if you have an incident like that 2 years ago, that should have been a massive warning. Don't carry on.
And apparently contact has broken down before.
Yeah, lots of times.
And we were talking to Rear Admiral Chris Parry, who says he thinks the reason it was an 8-hour delay in alerting the US Coast Guard 8 hours after it went missing was because contact had probably broken down before. Oh, well, that's happened before. It'll be back soon.
And I think, actually, your interview with Chris Parry there was absolutely illuminating, because he was just... I mean, clearly, I think he was quite furious, actually, that this has ever been allowed to kind of go ahead. People who actually are experts in this field were just thinking, what on earth is going on here?
Why wasn't this submersible connected to a ship on the surface?
But also, the fact that people were signing these... I think it does show a kind of greater thing about the human psyche, though, doesn't it? That even though you are signing this form which says you may... die on this mission.
On the first page, it says 3 times.
You may die.
3 ways you may die.
And I think it says we're not regulated.
It does.
And yet people still spend £250,000 to go in, because you always think it's not going to be you.
And it's a reminder that the deep, dark depths, thousands of feet down, deep, dark depths of the ocean is one of the unexplored areas. And I'm surprised at this kind of thing. I mean, look at this sort of private SpaceX, those kind of missions. I'm surprised these kind of tragedies, and we don't know that it's a tragedy, and let's all hope and pray that something good comes out of this. But it's surprising that this kind of disasters don't happen more often with these private companies.
And
maybe it does, and we don't know.
That's
but
right.
Because there's who would have thought 2 billionaires and a teenage boy on this submersible, and a very accomplished mariner, the French sailor who's called Mr. Titanic.
And excited about the Titanic, and you've got that kind of money to burn, you might well think it'd just be amazing, and you trust the company, and you've paid all this money.
I don't think I would have trusted it.
It looks like,
No rescue plan.
But it's about kind of taking advantage, isn't it, of very wealthy people with a huge passion who want to be able to sit around at the next drinks party and tell the story of the one thing that they've done that nobody else has done. Like, that has definitely played a part in this, isn't it?
And I thought you made an interesting point earlier, Bev, when you were talking about, obviously, your own personal experiences with your sister James, and how, actually, women do have a different mind. And I don't want to kind of go down the sexist gender stereotypes or whatever, but actually you don't see see women doing these things.
You really don't?
All 5 occupants are men.
Yeah, yeah.
There is one woman, actually, in the video that we showed yesterday, which from a CBS American channel show, there was one woman who tried for 30 years, she was a banker, and for 30 years she tried to get down, and she did 2 thwarted attempts with this same company, and in the end she achieved it on the 3rd one. And she's crying in the submarine, and they had the footage, and she's saying to the guy, to Stockton, the guy that owns the place, she's saying, you know, I love you, I love you, I love you. Like that admiration that he'd enabled her to fulfil this dream. But the chances of it going well were clearly fairly slim. Right, should we move on to issue closer to home?
Yeah.
Recession inevitable. Sam, potentially interest rate rises. Awful news for anybody with a mortgage.
Yeah, we're expecting the bank to put up interest rates in a little an hour and a half, less than an hour actually.
And it's small businesses, loans, it's
small
businesses.
Yeah, and it could be as much as 0.5%, which would be a real dramatic move from the bank. But yesterday we had various members of Jeremy Hunt's Economic Advisory Council out and about.
Yeah.
The Treasury were making clear that they were speaking in their own capacity as because they're all employed in like JP Morgan and companies like that. But they were out and about on the airwaves saying actually it's time to force a recession to bring down inflation. I mean, this is a terrible position we're in as a country.
So we want to inflict a recession on the country.
As if people are not struggling enough already, even if you don't have a mortgage because you probably can't get on the housing ladder, your rent's out of control, you've got absolutely no control over that. Food prices, which no one can avoid paying for. This is not luxury discretionary items. The food price inflation is off the scale still. You know, inflation didn't fall from April to May at all. It's still stubbornly sticky at 8.7%.
And underlying inflation is going up.
And then let's force a recession to make everybody feel absolutely, give us a spring in our step. The only good thing is that it's warm weather and people don't have to put on their central heating.
I was at a reception last night talking to some Tory MPs, talk about bleak, the mood, because I said, your economic policy isn't working. The Tory party is nothing if it doesn't have a reputation for economic competence and credibility. And if you look at the polls now, people now trust Labour more to sort out the economy.
Yeah.
And this is going to make it much worse.
Yeah. And I think, obviously, the hope had always been for the Conservatives that ahead of the next election they'd be able to do those personal tax cuts, finally get back to being the tax-cutting party that they should be. And actually, when you've got inflation just stubbornly sticking at 8.7%, you know, no sign of a dramatic dip.
I actually tweeted yesterday, or said to some Tory MPs yesterday, I said, this is the week the Tory party finally lost any hope of winning the next general election, in my view.
And I think, actually, I was speaking to a former Cabinet Minister yesterday who was pretty furious about the Bank of England and actually felt that the whole system, it's too late to change it now because we're in the midst of this crisis, but actually the whole system is not fit for purpose, that we should be looking worldwide for people who know how to respond to modern economic situations and are not kind of stuck in the 1980s.
That's their job, is to keep a curb on inflation, to keep it at 2% or whatever. And they literally have failed to do that month after month. And it feels as though Jeremy Hunt and his team are saying, well, something will change, something will happen.
I'm just not sure
through the year?
Care. That's what it feels like, doesn't it?
They will when they lose their seats.
Well, quite. Sam, Emma, thanks for now. You'll be back in just a moment, won't you? We are, of course, reaching the critical final hours of rescue for the Titan submersible. We're going to be speaking to a former journalist who had his own perilous experience at the wreck of the Titanic.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in their home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 11 o'clock on Thursday, the 22nd of June. This is To The Point on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So coming up for the rest of this morning, we've reached the critical final moments as time runs out in the search for the missing Titan submersible. The air supply on board is estimated to run out any minute now. As soon as we get any update, we will bring you that.
And is a recession inevitable? I fear it is. The Bank of England is going to hike interest rates, we're pretty sure, for the 13th consecutive time. We will bring you that news live as it happens at midday.
And we'll return to our reporters on the ground around the country to see what you think about today's economic mood. Get involved as well this morning. Let us know your thoughts on email. gbviews@gbnews.com is the address to message us. But first of all, here is your latest news with Rhiannon Jones.
Bev, thank you. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 11. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The US Coast Guard says the search for the missing Titanic submersible has been expanded as it enters its critical phase. Aircraft and 10 ships are searching 10,000 square miles of the North Atlantic, while 2 remote-controlled submersibles use sonar to monitor under the surface. L'Atalante, carrying state-of-the-art ROV, has arrived in the area, according to website marinetraffic.com. British deep-water salvage company Magellan is en route to aid in the rescue. 5 people are inside the craft that lost contact on Sunday. Frank Owen, a retired commander from the Royal Australian Navy, says the search operation is incredibly complicated.
The only vehicle that can probably bring it to the surface is the US Navy's deep salvage remotely operated vehicle that should be on scene on the site by now, but it needs to know where it's to go to. It's not really a search asset, it's a recovery asset. So, and then it will take time, perhaps 2 hours, to get down to 4,000 metres.
The Bank of England is set to increase the interest rate for a 13th consecutive time later as it tries to tackle ongoing price rises. The latest figures published yesterday showed inflation was stuck at 8.7% in May. The interest rate, currently at 4.5%, remains the bank's primary tool to lower inflation. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, says the government's doing all it can to halve inflation.
The Prime Minister is committed to bringing those interest rates down, halve those interest rates this year, to grow the economy, to reduce debt. This is absolutely the economic focus of the government, and we will be taking action to drive those things forward. And I think it is the duty of government. We are relentlessly focused on that.
Amid rising inflation, Labour's called on banks to provide support to homeowners facing mortgage payment difficulties. The party claims their 5-point plan would allow borrowers to switch to interest-only payments or extend their mortgage terms. The government says lenders are already required to engage with struggling customers. Shadow Financial Secretary James Murray told GB News Labour's plans should be taken into account.
Government should follow our 5-point plan that we set out today, which would require lenders to allow borrowers to switch to interest-only mortgages for a temporary time period or extend the length of their mortgage term. And it would also require lenders to wait a minimum of 6 months before initiating any repossession proceedings. You know, that's the kind of targeted help that we need.
Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has ruled himself out of the race to become the next NATO chief. When asked about leading the alliance, he told The Economist he was withdrawing because of unsolved issues within the organisation. He also stated the US wants the current Secretary-General, Jens Stoltenberg, to continue in the role. He's due to step down in September. King Charles says the Windrush generation has made a significant difference to the UK, praising its legacy as profound and permanent. 75 years after the first crossing from the Caribbean, the King will be among those at a service held at Windsor Castle later, marking the anniversary. A £1 million fundraising effort is also underway to recover the anchor from the ship and put it on display. HMT Empire Windrush sank off the coast of Algeria in 1954. The search for a firefighter who went missing while attempting a charity swim across the English Channel has been called off. Ian Hughes was raising money for charities including the British Heart Foundation and Midlands Air Ambulance. The 42-year-old was being accompanied by a support boat but went missing in French waters on Tuesday. The Ukrainian Intelligence and Security Service has received information that Russia's considering an attack on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine will share all available information with their global partners. He warns radiation knows no national borders and its hits are only determined by the direction of the wind. Mr. Zelensky says an incident like the Kakhovka Dam will not be repeated and the world has been warned. And tech billionaire Elon Musk is picking a fight with Mark Zuckerberg. And guess what? The Meta boss is up for it. Mr. Musk posted on Twitter that he was keen for a cage fight with Mr. Zuckerberg. The fellow tech billionaire then replied, posting a screenshot of the tweet on Instagram, of course, with the caption, "Send me location." Twitter's CEO responded, "Vegas Octagon." So they're going big. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back over to Andrew and Bev.
Well, it's with a heavy heart, we have to say. Time does appear to be running out as experts and scientists from across the world work against the clock to try to find and rescue the 5 men trapped on board the Titan submersible. However, as we heard earlier from Rear Admiral Chris Parry, he thinks time has already run out.
So after losing contact on Sunday, the 96 hours of oxygen supporting the 5 men is expected to run out close to midday, just less than an hour. Our next guest has his own extraordinary story of exploring the Titanic wreck, a former ABC News science correspondent who was the first reporter to visit the wreck of the Titanic back in 2000.
And he's joining us all the way from Dallas in Texas, and he is Dr. Michael G.N. Michael, good morning. it was a pretty extraordinary experience for you when you went deep down to the Titanic, because you too got into deep difficulties.
Yes, and obviously this morning I feel a special kinship for these 5 poor souls, and it's difficult for me to recall the experience, but yes, it was back in 2000, and the dive went very well. Took about 2.5 hours to go down. We toured the bow, had a moment of prayer for the people who lost their lives down there. And then the problem began when we left the bow and headed towards the stern. You'll recall the Titanic broke into 2 pieces. The bow went straight down, the stern did a somersault, landed on its back, exposing the propeller. So as we approached the stern, my attention was caught by this very shiny, large propeller. But then at the same time, I sensed that our sub was accelerating, which seemed strange to me. We should be decelerating. And I later found out that we got caught in a very strong underwater current that do exist down there, by the way, and we were slammed into the blades of the propeller, which you see there. This propeller is much larger than our small 3-man sub. And so the collision and then huge chunks of the Titanic started falling down on us, and we knew right then and there that we were in very serious trouble, that this wasn't some minor oopsie. And everything fell silent inside the sub.
So you were effectively trapped, were you, behind the propeller?
Yeah. Yes, somehow we got trapped behind the blades, between the inverted poop deck and the blades of the propeller. And our pilot, it was a former MiG pilot, this was a Russian sub that I was on, was struggling to get us out with no success. So I went through a series of emotions. First, I tried, as a scientist, I tried to figure out how we could possibly get out. Soon, just concluded that there was no way to get out, and then felt an enormous sadness, and then ultimately a sense of peace before I discovered that Victor, our pilot, had managed to extricate us after the better part of an hour. It seemed like an eternity down there, but I was ready to give up my life and join the people who had lost their lives down there. It was pretty extraordinary.
Just on that point, you say you'd reached a point, a sense of peace. Had you become resigned to the fact that that was where you were going to, it was all going to end?
You know, Andrew, it's interesting, and as a scientist, I try to just stick to the facts. It's difficult for me to understand why I transitioned from this really heavy sense of sadness, as if the entire weight of the Atlantic Ocean had landed on my shoulders, to suddenly just feeling a sense of peace. I don't know how else to describe it. It's an unreasonable sense of peace, but there it is. And I thought of my wife. I would never see it. We were newlyweds. It was actually our wedding anniversary when I was down there, September. And I just then suddenly felt peace and was ready to let go of my life, and then was given a second chance at life. And it seems as though these four people are not going to be given that chance at life. And that just breaks my heart, because I know what they've gone through.
Michael, you were down there in 2000, so 23 years ago. How did your vessel compare to the one that we're now talking about, the Titan?
Well, Bev, night and day, because the vessel I was on, the Mir 2, was originally designed as a scientific research vessel, teardrop shaped, typical, no frills. It had been time tested over and over again. It was a serious vessel created by serious-minded people. And by contrast, this Titan, unfortunately, was designed primarily for tourism. There are reports that it wasn't really quite up to snuff. We'll have to wait to see about that. There'll be time enough. If we can never recover this vessel, we may never know what went wrong. Keep in mind that it took 73 years for us to discover the wreck of the Titanic, and it's huge. What are the odds that we will ever find this tiny craft, which is like a mosquito in size by comparison, if we cannot locate it? So we may never know what went wrong, but certainly we need to pause all trips to the Titanic, I believe, and figure out, what kind of restrictions should we place. This is not a joyride. This is a serious business. The ocean is a merciless beast, really. It's ready to swallow you up. And people who think of this as, well, let's just go on a joyride or tourism. I'm not suggesting that the people down there had that, but many people I encounter have that impression. It's a very serious business. It's also not just the wreck of a ship. It's sacred ground. People lost their lives down there, and that hit me like a sledgehammer between the eyes. I'll never forget that. It's just such a powerful experience being down there and being so close to the Titanic, where men, women, and children breathed their last. And this was their last resting place. We should treat it with respect.
Michael, you sound quite emotional just reliving all this. And I wonder, do you think actually that it, bearing in mind, as you say, it is the last resting place of 1,500 souls whose bodies were never found, is it appropriate for people to be doing effectively, you were there on a scientific mission, the Titan was people going for a thrill?
I don't want to seem judgmental, Andrew, really. I'm trying to be very respectful. But the fact is that there's something about us humans that is unique. We have this kind of non-Darwinian spirit that drives us to give up our sense of survival, to explore worlds beyond the Darwinian jungle. There's no other way to put it. I'm in a very philosophical mood this morning, very emotional. And I think it's that human spirit that drives us to go to the bottom of the ocean or the top of a mountain or to explore worlds within and beyond our solar system. It's a very mysterious thing that science alone cannot explain, but there it is. So today I fear that we will be mourning the loss of life, but we will also be celebrating this mysterious, unique, vexing human spirit that causes us to do these things. And I don't know how to come down. I have such mixed feelings about it all. But yes, Andrew, Bev, I'm just having a hard time holding it together because I'm having to relive this all over again for the last 72 hours. It's just, I've been just hoping when I went to bed last night, hoping that we could have good news this morning, but it doesn't seem that way. It takes about 2.5 hours just to even get down there.
Do you have, Michael, I've been wondering about is whether the people on board, whether the passengers would have access to pens and papers to write last notes to their loved ones. Do they have their mobile phones down there that they would be writing emails that might get rediscovered once they leave? For you, having been in that situation, do you think you would have the mindset to want to communicate to the people you might be leaving behind like that?
Wow, that's a really interesting question, Bev. I didn't have my cell phone. Electromagnetic waves don't communicate in seawater. It's salty. You communicate by hydrophone. Acoustically, it's akin to 2 tin cans connected by a string. But it is possible that these folks who are on a tourist mission were allowed to bring their cell phones to take pictures and so forth. And if we ever recover the ship, then it's possible that we could have the benefit of seeing their final thoughts. I can't, especially the father and the son.
Yeah.
I have a young son. And it's really hard to imagine how that must have been like. I went through it. I know what it feels like to be buried alive in a tin can at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. It's terrifying, terrifying.
Michael, just finally, there's this terrible irony, isn't there, that the world's most famous shipwreck, it appears it's claiming more lives 110, 12 years later.
I was thinking exactly the same thing, Andrew. These waters in the North Atlantic are so treacherous. When you get out there, we left from Halifax, Nova Scotia. And when you get out to those waters, I remember the night before I was going to dive, I wanted a sense of what the victims of the Titanic had seen. What was the last thing they had seen? What did they experience before they went down? And so I was all alone. I went up to the captain's deck. Everybody else was asleep. And I just looked out over the ocean. I leaned against the rail, and I had 2 impressions. First of all, this ocean is restless. The ocean is just constantly churning, moving. It just doesn't quit, and it's just ready to swallow you up. I had the impression of it being just a giant beast. And then the second thing I remember, I'll never forget, is that I did a 360-degree look at the ocean, and there was just nothing, just the horizon. There's just nothing. It's 360 degrees of nothingness in the midst of this restless monster. And so I have just the memories of something that I wish I could forget. And I'm just hoping and praying that these 5 souls on board were able to experience even a semblance of peace of the kind of peace that I was able to benefit from. We'll never know.
Well, look, wonderful to talk to you, and thank you for sharing that with us. That's Dr. Michael Gian, who was had his own very close brush with death by the Titanic back in 2000. Still finds it very moving
You would, wouldn't
to talk
you?
about. Yeah, and excellent. And he came to terms of peace.
Yeah.
He'd accepted it.
Yeah.
Not sure I could.
I suppose it's that inevitability at that point. It's the idea that you can do nothing.
No.
I imagine, you know, there would be panic at some point. There would be distress, desperation, and then, as you said, you get to the point where you think, I can do no more.
Yeah. He clearly was no fan of the Titan submersible, was he?
And I think it raises really interesting questions about these tourist trips, whether it's a trip to the moon or a trip to the bottom of the ocean.
Is it all too much? Now, we're expecting that we'll get a decision on interest rates at midday. We will bring it live to you from the Bank of England. Our very own Liam Halligan, a business and economic editor, is there. It will be the 13th consecutive rise as inflation stays stubbornly at 8.7%.
So let's speak to Conservative MP Sir John Redwood now to get a reaction ahead of this announcement. Good morning, Sir John. It's the news that nobody wanted, and it's going to hit people incredibly hard and might just cost the Conservatives the next election.
Well, it's very bad news for mortgage holders, and I do think the bank needs to improve what it does and change its approach. And I think the government needs to work with the bank on a better and more rounded counter-inflation strategy. Very crucial to get those price rises back under control, but also crucial not to have a big recession to do so.
You were an MP under Margaret Thatcher's regime, of course. Interest rates went up to 16% at that point. People lost their homes. We're living in very different times. Particularly young homeowners have got used to these 0-1% interest rates, tiny payback on their mortgages. This is going to hit that generation particularly hard. It feels very cruel.
Well, it hits people who are on a 2-year or a 5-year mortgage that comes due for rolling over. And yes, I feel very sorry for them, and they will get a big shock. It, of course, also, I trust, will mean higher rates of interest for all those people with savings. So there will be some people who will do rather better out of the really bad news for those who are borrowing. But my criticism is that the bank was wrong to keep interest rates as low as it did and to buy all those bonds up at ever crazier prices. When we were well into recovery from lockdown, the 150 billion extra they did was excessive. At the time, I said I thought it was likely to be inflationary. I think there's now a grave danger the bank lurches too far the other way, and I'm calling on them today to say that they're not going to go on selling these bonds at ever diminishing prices and ever larger losses. The taxpayer has to pay all those losses. There's no need to incur all those losses by market sales at these very depressed levels. And the more bonds they sell, the worse the mortgage misery is going to be. So banks, stop the mortgage misery to the extent that you can by do not sell all those bonds at very cheap prices.
So, John, the bank has a target of inflation of 2%. It's currently nearly 9%. It's missed the target for month after month after month. We know there's been all sorts of extenuating world circumstances. But if this were in the private sector, I would suggest that Andrew Bailey, the chief executive, would be out on his ear. Why do Bank of England governors keep their jobs despite mistake after mistake after mistake?
Well, it's a commonly held idea by politicians and a lot in the media that the Bank of England is independent and that therefore it's quite wrong for governments to intrude or to make any changes. But this, of course, is a complete misunderstanding of the constitutional position. The only truly independent power the Bank of England has is the power to set bank rates, and I don't wish to take that away from them. I'm glad they themselves admit they've made a bad series of errors over it, and they're now having a review into their practice and why their economic models and forecasts were so wrong. And the sooner they get economic models that work better and make judgments that are better, the sooner the country will be better off. But the rest of the bank is not independent. The bond buying, for example, every penny that they spent on buying up bonds at crazy prices had to be approved in advance by the Chancellor of the Exchequer for the general programme of buying. And the Chancellor of the Exchequer, on behalf of taxpayers, indemnified the bank against all losses. Indeed, the bank, I think, on its website, says that it acted as an agent of the Treasury. So it's in that area where they expanded their balance sheet too much and they're now in danger of contracting it too much, that I think the government has to have words with the governor and say, are you really sure this is a good thing to be doing? You were wrong last time, and we are jointly responsible for this policy.
John, you were a safe pair of hands, is how it felt to the nation, I think, if I can say that, when you were the Chancellor. What would you do now? If you were in Jeremy Hunt's position now, what would you be doing to help people? Corporation tax, VAT cuts?
Well, there's so much I would be doing, and I've been advising publicly the Chancellor to do more things. First thing I would say is you shouldn't make all of the adjustment be on the demand side. You shouldn't say the only way out of this is to take money away from people, particularly from mortgage holders, so they can't spend, so that then prices fall. You should do more on the supply side. There are shortages across the board which are fueling a lot of these price rises, and we don't make enough and grow enough and produce enough at home. Get on with the domestic energy. Get those oil and gas fields pumping oil and gas from the UK North Sea. And you'll then have a bonanza of tax revenues, which will start to bring the deficit down, and you will provide some pressure against ever-surging price rises. Let us grow more food instead of spending all our farming grants on telling farmers not to farm with all these sums of money for wilding and for letting wildflowers grow where corn used to. Let's go back to the old-fashioned idea that subsidies should be used to get us to grow more food. People would love to buy more British-grown food, and if we had more food around with lower transport costs, that would help on the inflation front.
So why aren't they doing that?
Why are we ripping people off with a 5% VAT on domestic fuel?
So why are none of those things happening, John? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I really want to know why number 10 and number 11 are not making any of those changes.
Well, you must ask them. I mean, I'm talking to them through you and through my website, and when I make speeches in Parliament, a lot of MPs on the Conservative side certainly agree with me. They think a big expansion in our supply capacity would be great. They think taxing energy to the extent that we do for both business and individuals is quite the wrong thing to do, when quite a bit of the original price rises came from the energy side. We need cheaper energy so that we can make things in Britain, rather than having to import them from countries that burn the energy in their countries, which for some strange reason doesn't seem to worry people on the CO2 front.
All right, that's Sir John Redwood with some pretty straightforward solutions. Thanks so much for joining us. When I last saw Liz Truss, I said, when you sacked your Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng, why did you put Jeremy Hunt in there, who's got no economic background at all? Why didn't you give the job to John Redwood?
What did she say?
She said it wouldn't have calmed the markets. Well, Jeremy Hunt hasn't calmed the markets, has he?
Wouldn't have kept the globalists happy who want them in there, because none of this is in Britain's interest at the moment, from what I can see. Anyway, lots more to talk about. You're with GB News. First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive, because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's 11:28. You're with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner on GB News. We're going to go straight to the Bank of England, where our very own Liam Halligan is there, because we're getting that interest rate rise announcement on the dot of midday. Liam.
Just very quickly, Andrew and Bev, I know you've got a lot to get through before we get to the top of the hour, 12 noon, when from the Bank of England, the building behind me, we are going to hear the latest interest rate decision. We're expecting a rise from 4.5% to 4.75%, possibly even to 5%. It will be the 13th interest rate rise in a row. Why is the Bank of England raising interest rates, making our life more difficult, making it tougher for homeowners with mortgages? Well, the reason they are is because inflation is still high. It's 8.7% compared to just 4% in the US. The British policy-making establishment, they have got a serious problem, Andrew and Bev. We're going to hear in the next half hour or so how they're going to resolve it.
And still to come, of course, Labour's going to appoint a diversity czar, like we need one of those, to remove barriers to enter politics. Is this an outdated strategy? Well, I think so. And so did our Tory MP who we spoke to, Darren, I forgot his name.
He was very good anyway, I can't remember his name. He's the kind of politician that no one's heard of, that we should all know their name.
And his family from the Caribbean, so he's got entitled to talk about. That's after your morning news, of course, with Rhiannon.
Andrew, thank you. It's just gone 10:30. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The US Coast Guard says the search for the missing Titanic submersible has been expanded as it enters its critical phase. Aircraft and 10 ships are searching 10,000 square miles of the North Atlantic, while 2 remote-controlled submersibles use sonar to monitor under the surface. L'Atalante, carrying state-of-the-art ROV, has now arrived in the area, according to website marinetraffic.com. British deepwater salvage company Magellan is also en route. 5 people are inside the craft that lost contact with the surface on Sunday. The Bank of England is set to increase the interest rate for a 13th consecutive time later as it tries to tackle ongoing price rises. The latest figures published yesterday showed inflation was stuck at 8.7% in May. The interest rate, currently at 4.5%, remains the bank's primary tool to lower inflation. Amid rising inflation, Labour's called on banks to provide support to homeowners facing mortgage payment difficulties. The party claims their 5-point plan would allow borrowers to switch to interest-only payments or extend their mortgage terms. The government says lenders are already required to engage with struggling customers. And King Charles says the Windrush generation has made a significant difference to the UK, praising its legacy as profound and permanent. 75 years after the first crossing from the Caribbean, the King will be among those at a service held at Windsor Castle later to mark the anniversary. A £1 million fundraising effort is also underway to recover the anchor from the ship that made that crossing. HMT Empire Windrush sank off the coast of Algeria in 1954. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2792 and €1.1626. The price of gold is £1,507.78 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,491 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
And still to come, Sam Lister and Emma Wolf will be back talking about the big issues of the day. This is To The Point on GB News.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think. Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in their home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now? Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 11:36, you're with To The Point on GB News. As we've said, the Bank of England is expected to announce an interest rate rise in the next 20 minutes or so. Joining us now is Will Hollis, who is speaking to a few people in the industry. Morning, Will.
Good morning. Yes, we're here in Hull at UK Moneyman, a mortgage broker, and you can see all around. Lots of people working, lots of people checking their emails as well as checking the mortgages, because the M word is the big word for the day. We're of course talking about, interest rates, and we've been talking about inflation yesterday, but lots of people have got their eyes set on 12 o'clock, because that is when the Bank of England will announce how much they're going to be raising interest rates by. We've got Malcolm Davidson here, who is from UK Moneyman. You're the managing director. As we inch closer to 12 o'clock, how is the atmosphere here, and how is the atmosphere going to be for the people who are looking at mortgages and maybe their contracts ending?
Yeah, well, I guess the tension is rising a little bit. If you've got your mortgage coming to an end in the next 6 months, you're going to be looking out for the announcement today. We were hoping that it might be a 0.25% rise. There's rumour that it might be a little bit higher than that, giving people added anxiety about what's going to happen if their mortgage deal is coming to its end.
And what are the advice that your mortgage brokers are going to be giving? Because everybody will have a different mortgage, everybody will have a different salary, but what's the general idea that people will be hearing from your team and other mortgage brokers around the country?
Well, if you're in a fixed rate mortgage, there's no need to panic, because your deal, if it isn't coming to an end in the next 6 months, you're okay, you're insulated against today's news. But if your deal is coming to an end before Christmas, then most people are taking action now, getting themselves locked into a new fixed rate. It's difficult to know whether to fix for 2 years or 5 years. 2 years gives the opportunity to refinance again in 2 years' time when the situation may be better. But if they're more risk averse, people are still fixing in for those longer periods of time to give themselves that longer peace of mind of knowing that at least their payment is going to be a set amount if things continue to get worse.
It's going to be a busy day here. We're still looking towards that 12 o'clock time. Malcolm's not going anywhere, and neither is any of his staff, but still a little bit away from when the Bank of England announced that interest rate decision.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, Will. Will Hollis there, bringing us a bit of insight into the interest rates. Jill, thank you, Will.
And of course,
just to be clear,
at 12 o'clock.
Andrew Pearce, it's not that he doesn't like Will Hollis, he didn't want to go to the... He's
very
excited.
fine reporter.
He's very excited that our panel, Sam Lister and Emma Walbert, we can all pull ourselves together. Right, ladies, we're going to talk about diversity in the Labour Party. And Angela Rayner, somebody... I know that Angela's a massive fan of Angela Rayner.
Yeah. She's the deputy leader.
And she is going to appoint a diversity czar to remove the barriers to enter politics. Feels a bit old-fashioned, this, Sam, doesn't it now?
Do you know what really struck me about this? So, I mean, it's the Labour Party, for goodness sake. It's the Labour... So I had a quick look just before I came in to see in Don Valley, where I grew up, it's Doncaster, it's a mining town. Before Blair, the Blair Landside, the previous 3 MPs, one was a trucker, one was a coal miner, one was a trade unionist. You didn't need a diversity czar back then. And this is going back to the 60s, 70s, 80s. And, like, how has the Labour Party got into a position where it is so full of middle-class MPs that it has to appoint a diversity czar? It is no longer the party of working people.
Yeah, because it feels... It's box-ticking, Emma, surely.
It totally is. This felt... I had to check this wasn't a story from 20 years ago.
Exactly.
Literally, working-class people and women. Please, I don't need my hand-holding to be encouraged into politics. I think there are plenty of things they could do to make it more friendly for many different groups, but I don't think, A, women need to be talked of in this patronising way. Working-class people don't need to be patronised in this way. What about reforming working hours so that women who are mothers can also can work in Westminster or whatever? Basic things like that. But as for diversity czars, even the word czar makes me want to reach for a gun.
Yeah, and more than 50% of Labour MPs are women anyway.
Yeah, and also the bigger problem the Labour Party has is the grip the trade union has on candidate selection. So I actually had a long chat a while ago to somebody who was very well connected with the Labour Party, who had the great kind of, working class background and all the things they're looking for here, and had the backing of an MP, but could not get the backing of a trade union. And so, they just didn't have a chance of getting selection. So I think, the party's got wider issues here, I think, really.
And will it be employed by the Labour Party? Or will it be paid for by the public? Is it going to come out of public money?
I sincerely hope not. I don't think that will go down well. I mean, I hope it's paid for by them. I'm not sure it's quite clear.
I don't want to talk about state the obvious. We've got a Prime Minister with Indian heritage.
The Home Secretary is...
Suella Braverman is... Well, this is the thing, right?
I think
it's not relevant. That's why we...
Yeah.
That's why
And
we
she's
sort of
shock horror, a woman.
Yeah.
She's a woman.
And the Foreign Secretary isn't white either.
The Conservative Party have got diversity in action rather than in theory, and that's the difference.
And the Labour Party has never, ever elected a woman leader.
No.
Maybe the Labour Party... Well, maybe the Labour Party does need a diversity czar because it's the Labour Party that has much more of a diversity problem than the Conservatives. I think
we'd rather hear from them about what they're going to do to stop interest rates spiralling out of control.
Yeah, they haven't got an answer because nobody's got an answer. This is the problem.
It's divisive. It's divisive. We should be beyond the point where what melanin you've got in your skin or whether your gender.
Exactly.
We've done well. It's the 75th anniversary of Windrush today, and it's a really good time to just reflect on how brilliantly diverse and welcoming this country is.
Exactly.
Let's talk about qualities, not genetics. Sorry, carry on.
Who's been to Glastonbury Festival here?
My worst nightmare.
No.
None of us?
My worst nightmare.
Right.
I'm loving this weather, but I'm actually really sad that it's not raining. I love it when the Glastonbury weekend,
Quagmire.
when it rains and you see the mud. And have you seen them then, after the Glastonbury horror weekend, have you seen them tramping through London with their mud-encrusted sleeping bags and people talking about the bath they got into after 5 days camping? Camping is a nightmare. Glastonbury is I would pay, and we're talking about Glastonbury prices, I would pay not to go to Glastonbury.
£300
I would pay
for a ticket.
£300 not to go to Glastonbury and camp with a bunch of hippies and crusties.
And this is the place where they were singing "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn." Jeremy Corbyn was there a few years ago.
Sing it, sing it.
Oh, Jeremy Corbyn.
Oh, my God.
Terrible man, terrible Labour leader.
Everything went back with less. Everything had to be sung to that tune for about 5 years. I'm literally getting the shudders.
I know, but I must say, when I heard them sing that, I thought, is he going to do a bit better in this 2017 election?
But you know what? It's the Glastonbury thing. It's the classic champagne socialist crowd, though, isn't it? It's £7 for a beer, £300 for a ticket. If you want to go in your yurt and your glamping, it's thousands of pounds.
I have friends who live in the Barbican who are taking their kiddos in a wheelbarrow. And they think they're incredibly kind of way out there with their wheelbarrows and their expensive water bottles for the kids. I just,
It is a festival for the middle-aged. That is not cool, you know. Surely nobody... It's middle-aged, middle class. It's not cool
Who's
at all.
topping the bill this year?
Oh, I couldn't even tell you, Andrew.
It's Kylie Minogue.
It's not ABBA, so you don't need to worry.
There's a slot free and that Taylor Swift might turn up.
Oh, that'd be great. I wouldn't know a Taylor Swift record if I felt it.
I have to say I like a bit of Taylor Swift.
Do you?
Yeah, I do. There's a brilliant documentary about her on Netflix at the moment. But no, it wouldn't be enough to get us there, would it? What else are we going to talk about? Let's...
Rick Astley. He's performing at Glastonbury. He's my generation. He's my generation, I'm afraid.
I've got a Rick Astley anecdote.
Tell us. What about Rick rolling? Why was that a thing?
I used to do some work at Carfest, which was the Chris Evans event, and it was a bit zhuzhy, and it was the only way I like to do a festival. I can't lie. I'm like you, Emma. I don't want to be in a field.
No.
But we had this little glamping situation, and Rick Astley was in the next tent. I didn't know that, and I'd got up in the morning, and I was going out to have a shower, and I had my towel and my wash bag under my arm, and as I walked out, Rick Astley walked out of his tent, and a gust of wind caught my towel, and I made eye contact with Rick Astley as I was pretty much naked in the field.
Right.
And he just said, "Good morning," and I went, "Oh, so sorry, good morning," and I just carried on, and I styled it out, and I styled it out, and I saw him later in the bar, and I said, "I'm ever so sorry about that," and he said, "Oh no, don't worry about it, don't apologise."
Red-blooded heterosexual man.
He is, and very popular. He's one of those people that has come back, hasn't he, from this renaissance, and people love him now.
Yeah, enduringly popular. Because you made about two hit records.
A bit like Chesney Hawkes. There's one Chesney Hawkes song.
Yeah,
that I am the one and only.
Yeah.
There's a lot of singing this morning.
Never going to give you up. Right, what about Sir Bernard Jenkins? What did he do? Isn't he stormed off something? What
and the Mail are after him.
It's like they're on day 8.
This is my newspaper has been targeting Sir Bernard Jenkins. Remember, he was on the Privileges Committee, which gave Boris Johnson a ludicrous 90
of the committee, wasn't he?
He was. Senior Tory MP, a Brexiteer, hates Boris.
Long time with Boris.
And the Mail reported, well, it was on Guido Fawkes, actually, we've all reported, that Sir Bernard went to a party too during lockdown.
Up to 10 people were believed to have been there. Social distancing apparently went out the window.
It was in the office of the Deputy Speaker, Dame Eleanor Lang.
Yeah, and it was for for Sir Bernard's wife's birthday. I think it was a joint birthday party.
And there was actually an invitation sent out.
Yeah. The Mail have been brilliant on this. So I was just going to say they've been brilliant because we're on Silence of Sir Bernard, day 8.
Yeah, I love that.
Every day they are going to run a story until he breaks his silence. And actually, I did have to say, I popped into the Mail office yesterday and told them that he was in the palace precincts. And
off by one of my colleagues.
And they sent down David Churchill to chase him around the estate.
You're inciting paparazzi harassment.
Well, they tracked him down, and actually Sir Bernard refused to speak. He said, "I'm not speaking to you," and according to David Churchill, stormed off and refused to engage. But they're just going to keep at him until he gives an explanation.
And it won't go away.
No.
And people
That is absolutely brilliant.
It's going to be raised in the comments.
Can you explain, Sam, why do some people have to sort of pay for their crimes? Not like crimes, having a glass of wine in lockdown.
Yeah.
Why do some people? Why does Boris? Why do the party goers who had parties? Why do the people that sat on benches with their sandwiches? Why did they have to answer for their crimes? And people like Sir Bernard just claiming that, firstly, it wasn't a party when it was, and the wife said, "Come to my birthday bash."
Only special people invited.
Why is he not being forced to answer? What about those jokers leaping around at that Christmas party the other day in the red braces and the mirror thing? Why are they not being?
Well, I think basically the allies of Boris are saying that it's time that the Privileges Committee investigates Sir Bernard.
Well, and we have to remember, so he's sitting in judgment on the former Prime Minister, having apparently broken the rules himself, rules that you and I, we all thought were stupid, but they were rules that his government brought in, and subjected the former not only to a 90-day ban but taken away his parliamentary power, so he can't enter Parliament and come and go as all other former MPs can.
And no wonder Boris is raging and angry and
childish
resentful.
and petty.
Because it is unfair. It is unfair that this guy who is on the committee was breaking the rules as well.
Yeah, and we shouldn't forget that Harriet Harman, who chaired it, 3 times in one day was talking on social media about how Boris had broken the rules spectacularly, and she was allowed to chair the committee.
Absolutely, but I think you might see Rishi Sunak, he's out doing an event later, taking questions from the press. He has refused so far to say anything about what he thinks about the 90 days, about the pass being removed, about the verdict of the report, and he didn't obviously vote on the...
No, he had a riveting meeting with the Swedish Prime Minister.
It's amazing how that appeared in his diary.
What do you think they talked about? Their most famous export, IKEA or ABBA? What else would you talk to the Swedish Prime Minister
And he had
about?
a charity dinner that he just had to go to. That last year was attended by Sajid Javid. So they didn't have the PM last year. Suddenly this year, this charity was
and how long does it, you know how long it takes to vote, Sam? 5 minutes.
Exactly.
Your Prime Minister. Hard to take you there.
Yeah, and I think it will be interesting because obviously it's very difficult for Rishi Sunak. He doesn't want to upset the Borisites in the party, doesn't want to upset the grassroots. But, can he stay silent forever on what he thinks?
No.
Is it fair? His colleagues, Michael Gove, has said 90 days was unfair.
Is my newspaper persistent?
Absolutely.
It is.
Absolutely.
The Daily Mail is on your case.
You're in trouble.
You are.
Will Hollis better watch out. Right. Thank you, Sam Lister. Stop looking at your phone on the telly. Honestly.
No, just checking if it was ringing.
At least we've got better places to be, clearly. No. Thank you for joining us. We've come to the end of our week. Coming up next is GB News Live with Mark Longhurst. This has been To The Point with Andrew and Bev. See you on Monday.
See you then.
Good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie Shuttleworth from the Met Office. Now, the rest of the afternoon will be warm and sunny, plenty of dry weather out there, but there's still a risk of thunderstorms, and that's as a result of the influence of the pretty unsettled weather that's affecting France and Germany over the next 24 hours. But high pressure is mostly extending across the UK, bringing many a fine end to the day. However, a thunderstorm warning is still in force for central areas. Now, across the west, you notice we'll start to see the cloud cover increasing and rain moving into parts of Northern Ireland and western Scotland overnight tonight. That could bring some pretty heavy downpours at times. But for many, it'll be a dry and quite mild night. Start to feel quite muggy, especially under the cloud and rain in the far west. So tomorrow morning will be a dry start for many areas of the country. We'll see a decent amount of sunshine across the southeast, and it's going to feel warm in that sunshine yet again. But across the west, it will turn increasingly cloudy throughout the day, with outbreaks of quite heavy rain into the afternoon across much of Scotland and areas of northwest England. Feeling very warm in the sunshine in the southeast, as I said, highs of 28 degrees tomorrow. Then through Friday evening, a fine end to the working week across the south and east, but cloud cover still continuing to increase across many northern areas. The rain will generally be quite patchy for most areas, but it's going to be quite persistent for northern Scotland. Some heavy downpours and perhaps some thundery downpours in there. But it will be an even milder night. Lows of 17 or 18 degrees for many towns and cities on Friday night. So a warm start on Saturday and plenty of warm weather around for much of the weekend. So Saturday we'll see plenty of fine and dry weather for the bulk of the UK. But we'll continue to see that pattern of rain moving in to northwestern areas throughout Saturday and Sunday.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist.